Hello and welcome to the first episode of Navigating NIL, powered by Eccker Sports. I'm Tyler Langford, and I'm very excited to be bringing everybody this first episode of the Eccker Sports podcast that we're launching. I'm joined for our first episode by someone whose name you might recognize if you're familiar with our company. He's a Creighton University Hall of Famer, all-decade basketball player. He played 2 sports in college. He's made a bunch of stops on the coaching wagon and ended up going into broadcasting before entering the business industry and really carving out, a career as a pioneer within the sports business industry. And he's someone who's been a great mentor to me. So, welcome to Randy Eccker. Randy, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for coming on.
Hi, Tyler. It's great to be here and really excited for you to host our podcast and kick it off with, being able to be a part of the very first couple.
Absolutely. Yeah. So just to kick things off, like we just mentioned in the brief intro for you, you're someone who's spent your entire life surrounded by sports. So I know that you grew up with your dad having been a coach. How is that experience growing up with, a father who's a coach? How did that impact and kind of kick off your life in sports?
It was really interesting, Tyler. It was a great life as a young kid who loved sports. And I probably love sports even today more than anybody I know, right? And that started, except for my little 6-year-old grandson, who just absolutely adores sports and is really into it. He reminds me so much of me because I went from, and in those days, there was no soccer, there was no other, but golf was not a real a big part of our lives growing up, or opportunities. Tennis wasn't. So you were football in the fall, you were basketball in the winter, and you were baseball in the spring and the summer. And my dad coached, and it was great because the elementary school I went to was right across the street from the high school. So before my dad would take me to school, and I would go early and we'd play sports before school. And then after school, I'd go over to the high school and I'd watch whatever practice was in season. And then I'd ride home with my dad. And so it gave me such great exposure to sports, at least those 3 major sports. Later on, I've obviously gotten exposure to a lot more, but it was a great life growing up. I had access to competitive guys. I was around it at a very high level, from a high school perspective anyway. For a long time, I developed a real competitiveness, a competitive drive, a desire to be good at it, to differentiate myself with it. And then, of course, my dad was very old school, and he was very competitive in his own right, and he expected a lot out of his kids, both personally and from a sports perspective. If you're going to compete, you were supposed to do it the right way. And he was very adamant about that, and I bore the brunt of a lot of that, as did a lot of my friends. And but it was great because I learned that when people yelled at you, it was because they wanted you to be better, right? And that became a big part. I was able to then thrive in a lot of situations, whether it's through junior high or high school, or ultimately into college and other levels, where you really learned that people just want you to be better, and they want you to do it the right way, and they want to help you. And that was a big part of my sports psychology growing up, and ultimately helping me to be extremely competitive when I got into the higher levels of sports.
That's awesome. Yeah. And I know that, one thing that you've talked about in the past is, you were recruited to play 3 different sports in college. And I know you played 2 at Creighton. How do you think that type of upbringing and that competitive spirit, which was, built by, seeing everyone that your dad coached and going to those practices and everything, how do you think that impacted, your success in multiple sports at the college level?
Well, it's a great question, Tyler. And I think a lot of it, I learned a lot playing football through elementary and junior high and high school. And I was both a starting quarterback and middle linebacker in high school for, a team that we lost to the eventual state champion on a field goal in the last 2 minutes of the game. So we had a very highly competitive program. My junior year, we were the largest school in the state. So we had, great competitiveness, football, basketball, baseball. I think a big part of it, there's several things. I think, and this is one of the bones I have to pick with a lot of folks who today push their kids or push young people into one sport at a really early age. I think that's really doing them a disservice, because I think there's a lot of crossover between sports. There's a lot of crossover between skill sets. It's great learning how to adjust and be competitive regardless of the situation. It's great learning how to hit and be tough, and a physical toughness as well as a mental and emotional and spiritual toughness. And I think that carries over. And I know it carried over into my basketball and my baseball. Um, and and I think that you just learn to adapt. And of course, you have to have some physical ability, you have to have some skills, but you've had to spend a lot of time developing and honing those skills. And that's where it probably helped me having such great access to sports growing up, because I was able to watch, learn, listen, and do all those things that helped me develop and practice and continue to play. So I developed those skill sets. But success, I think, is as much mental and emotional as it is physical. And so the opportunity to compete, to play multiple sports, to be a part of teams, to have competitive teams, to wanting to be successful, not just as an individual, but as an individual that's a part of the team. And the team success was always the most important thing. And I think learning those things kind of growing up and eventually through high school, the ability to apply those and be a leader, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally and spiritually, being a leader really sets you apart as part of those team environments, and really allowed me to have quite a bit of success on the court and on the baseball field.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and I definitely can see, why those traits would serve you so well throughout not only your sports career, but also in coaching and broadcasting and now in the business world. So let's talk a little bit about, your time at Creighton and what brought you there, what stands out to you about your time at Creighton. So yeah, I'd love to hear it. So first of all, I guess just what brought you to Creighton University? I know you were a highly touted recruit. What made Omaha, Nebraska the place that you wanted to call home?
It was really interesting. My parents were both educators, right? So they both taught. So education was a premium in our family, and that was, my dad didn't really want to get too involved in the whole recruiting process. He knew it was my deal, but he always said, Creighton's a really good school academically. Creighton's really a good school academically. I think there's a lot of factors. Probably the first thing that tweaked my interest in those days, in Denver growing up, we had 4 TV channels, right? So you didn't get a lot of sports unless it was part of those packages that, were on national TV or regionally syndicated and things like that. So you gathered a lot of information through Sports Illustrated and things along those lines. In my senior year, and in those days too, most of the recruiting happened after the season. So my senior year, Creighton was on the cover of Sports Illustrated as the most traveled team in the country. Right? They were playing from coast to coast. They went to Hawaii. They went to Brazil the summer before. And then it just so happened they lost to Kansas in a game that, had they won, probably would have taken them to the Final Four. So they were a great basketball program. They were well publicized and well traveled and things like that. And then, of course, the educational part of it was really good. When I went on my visit, they had just built a brand new law school, and I was very interested in going to law school at that time. But most importantly, Tyler, I think, and I didn't grow up Catholic, but most importantly, when I went to visit Creighton on my campus visit, it was the people. The people set it apart from every place else I had visited, everything else I had thought about. And I really started to focus in on, how comfortable I would be as a teammate and as a part of the community and things like that. And that made it a really easy decision in that regard.
That's fantastic. And yeah, I mean, for those of you who don't know, I am also a proud Blue Jay, and that's how I connected with Randy in the first place. So it's definitely a very special place, and the people there are wonderful, and it kind of just is a great ecosystem that we're lucky to have out in the heart of Omaha. So we talked about some things that stood out to you when you were visiting, and things that brought you to Creighton. Once you got to Creighton, what were some things, some memories, some traits that Creighton and your team and your teammates shared that I guess kept you there and kept you in the community and I guess put you on the path that you're now on today?
But there's just so many great things about my college experience. Um, one of them, continued to be the people, right? The class organization that is Creighton University. My coaches at the time, they were a diverse group, but Coach Apke was really one of the best people. Even today, he's still one of the best people I know. He cares about you as a person as well as a player. He wanted what was best for you. He took the whole person in mind. He was super competitive and super smart for sure. But that never ever took the place of caring about you as a person, first and foremost. Doc Bevilacqua, who has since passed away, was probably as much of a father figure to me as anybody I've ever had in my life. He was the team doctor. He went on every road trip with us. He was at most of our practices. We were at his house, you know, once a week at least. He'd fix pasta for us. We'd do our laundry out there, and not just us as players, but our roommates would come, or our, the other people that were friends of ours. They were just as welcome out there as we were. And he was a real difference maker on many levels as well. The Jesuit community was awesome, just great people and great mentors, spiritual mentors for me. That became a big part of it as well. And then, the education was great. Obviously, I learned a lot about myself as a person, and that set the tone for who I would be, who I would grow up to be. But then, of course, being an athlete and wanting to be successful in sports, eventually the opportunity to play baseball was great, and that was one of my most rewarding accomplishments as a student athlete was the ability to manage both basketball and baseball. But that didn't happen until my junior and senior year that I played baseball. So in the early days, it was the team, it was the camaraderie, it was the shared purpose, it was the competitiveness, and also the opportunity for success that we had.
So what was that like transitioning from, you're a basketball player for the first 2 years, you have your routine, and then all of a sudden you're given the chance to play baseball. What was that transition like for you to a two-sport collegiate Division I athlete?
Well, it really wasn't that big a deal because I had gone, in high school, I played football and, was very competitive and very much involved in the success of the team. And then basketball was very competitive and very much involved in the success of the team. And then baseball was the same in high school. So it was a great experience for me. And I think that really helped me in college when that occurred. And what happened, because I had been recruited almost as much for baseball as I was for basketball, it was just a different type of recruitment in those days. And so when I got to Creighton's campus, I went to the baseball coach and I said, listen, I played baseball in high school. Oh, I know who you are. And I said, I'd really like to play if it works out and if it would be okay with everybody. And he said, well, if you want to play baseball here, you've got to come out for fall baseball. And I said, well, I'm really not. I think I probably ought to go through basketball conditioning since that's what I'm here on scholarship for. And he said,
Right.
well, that's okay. If you don't want to play, then that's okay. I said, it's not that I don't want to play. I just don't think I can. You need to talk to Coach Apke about that. And so it just dropped and I got ready for basketball and had an average freshman year. I was like eighth man on the team. So sometimes I would play and sometimes I wouldn't. And sometimes I'd get in at the end and sometimes I wouldn't. We had a great team. We won 20 games, and we lost to Maryland, that was rated number 3 in the first game of the NCAA
Wow.
tournament. And so I didn't really have anything to object about. Right? I had a great time. And then my sophomore year, we started the season, and I wasn't really playing that much. I was kind of the same guy until we played North Dakota State at our place. And I got in with 10 minutes left to go, and we were down, like 6 or 8 points, and we ended up winning the game. And they were playing a zone, and I played the point against the zone, and we did really well. And then I started every game after that, and we had a great team. We ended up 19-7. But in those days, only 32 teams went to the NCAA tournament. And I think that year only 8 teams or 16 teams at the most went to the NIT. So at 19-7, we stayed home.
That's
And
crazy.
really, we're a top 20 type caliber team, and only the champions of the leagues went to the NCAA tournament. So it's pretty limited as to who was going to the tournament and not. And so I enjoyed my sophomore spring. And then at the beginning of my junior year, we were shooting baskets and playing pickup games and things like that in the fall. And our head coach, Tom Apke, came to me and said, "Hey, Randy, Coach Baker would like you to come out for baseball. They need a third baseman." And I said, "Well, what do you think?" He goes, "I think it'd be great. You'd be great at it." So I played fall baseball, and then we hit the ground running, and we had a great year in basketball. Just a lot of fun. I mean, it was super competitive. We were rated 12th in the country at one point.
Wow.
We lost, 4 games at the end of the year, went to the NIT, lost 4 games. We lost in the final game of the season. We played Marquette. It was 1977. So we play Marquette, and the winner of that game was going to go to the NCAA tournament. The loser went to the NIT. Well, we lost in a close and competitive game, which was hugely disappointing. And Marquette ends up winning the NCAA tournament. And the team we had lost right before Marquette, North Carolina Charlotte, came in third.
Oh, wow.
So that was the kind of schedule we were playing.
Yeah.
We played Louisville that had Darrell Griffith, and we played in the Freedom Classic, which was the Louisville Holiday Tournament at the time. And we were the only unranked team in the tournament, and we beat Auburn. I don't know what the final score was, but with 5 minutes left to go, we were up 28.
Oh, wow. I
And
love it.
they had 3 NBA players on their roster. Then we played Louisville, who had Darrell Griffith and, all these, 5-star level type recruits. And we lost to them in double overtime and just had a great experience. We beat Oregon State at Oregon State. We made our first 17 shots of the game. We beat them by 20. And we won 12 in a row at one point in the middle of the season to the end until we lost the 4 in a row. So, that was a great experience. And then I walked out and played baseball the next day and joined the team on the spring trip and played spring baseball. And we just had a blast, and just a great experience. Baseball, for anybody who plays at that level, is just a great experience.
It's great. It's a great game. And you led the team in home runs, correct?
Yeah, my junior and senior year, I led the team in home runs.
That's a good third baseman. That's a great third baseman. That's a smart coach, I'll tell you. Waiting a couple years and dragging you back in, I love it. It's a good move. So I know you had professional opportunities, post basketball and baseball. And if I'm not mistaken, were you looking to play possibly in the NBA / in Canada? And what then inspired you to kind of go the coaching route rather than pursue the professional opportunities that you had?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it was a totally different era. It was a totally different era for college basketball. There was no shot clock. There was no 3-pointer. The 4 corners, was a lot of people thought it was a stall. A lot of people thought it wasn't basketball. We certainly used it to our benefit, right? We would, the last 5 minutes of the game, there's only one game I ever remember losing when we went into our 5 game. And that was Southern Illinois, my senior year. But every other game, we ended up winning bigger than we had gone into it because we just were very disciplined. We were great passers. We were great free throw shooters, and so it was just a totally different game. And likewise, there weren't nearly as many professional opportunities either. There's only the NBA. The ABA was just then kind of getting started, right?
Right.
They were still, in a little bit of a neophyte in that regard. They hadn't really started paying the bigger salaries. They weren't doing a lot of the recruiting and scouting and things that they did later on when they signed the David Thompsons and things like that. So when when I graduated, I was working Larry Brown's basketball camps, which I had done throughout my career, and he was the head coach of the Denver Nuggets at the time. And so Larry came to me the first day of camp. They were having their rookie free agent camp going at the same time. He goes, "Randy, you need to be in our camp." I said, "Well, yeah, that'd be great." So I was able to try out, and a lot of their second year ABA players at the time were playing, and I knew some of them. I had played against them, and we were friends. And so I had a great camp, and but they had 12 roster spots, and they had 13 guaranteed salaries. So he said, "Listen, you've got a number of scouts here who would like you to come play over in Europe. You can certainly play over in Europe, but you want to coach, and you're going to be a good coach. And I would recommend you go into coaching." And I had already accepted the job at Creighton as an assistant coach. And I had a chance to play with the Athletes in Action at the time, which toured all over the world. They're the Christian-oriented athletes, and we would have had a basketball team. I'd been selected to play with them, and I'd ultimately turned them down because I had taken the coaching job. And so, the coaching was just a natural thing to do. And the other thing, going back to the Creighton stuff, they at that time they had one of the top law schools in the country, and I had my seat reserved and my money paid, and I was ready to go. And then Coach Apke had asked me to coach, and I went in and I talked to Dean Skolnick of the law school, and he said, "Hey, Randy." And I said, "Dean, I have a chance to coach. I don't know what to do. I committed to law school. I've already have my seat reserved. What do you think?" He goes, "Randy, you can always come back to law school. You can't always get into coaching at that level." And so I was able to do both, right? I was able to get into coaching. I didn't do law school. I was able to get into coaching and really start a career that, was great. It served me well. Wasn't nearly as fun as my playing career, probably, but I was able to coach a lot of kids and help a lot of people, and I really, really enjoyed coaching.
That's fantastic. And for Larry Brown to be the one that set you straight and put you on that path is hilarious. That's a great connection. So then looking back on your time as a coach, I guess are there some lessons that you took from your time as an athlete that impacted the way that you approached coaching? And, if so, how did that, impact your coaching style and your philosophies there?
That's a great question, Tyler. I was a coach's coach, right? I loved sports. I loved and coached basketball, obviously, at the college level. I loved coaching. I loved everything about it, right? I loved and I think the three things, even today, when people ask me, "Do you miss coaching?" And a lot of my friends do, right? Because they perceive me as kind of a coach. The you miss the strategizing, right? And you miss all of that. You miss the camaraderie and the esprit de corps, and all of that, because it's impossible to replicate in business what what you have as part of a team, right? Being an integral part of a team, that you share that experience and that commitment and all those things. But the most important thing that I really miss from a coaching standpoint is helping people, right? Because you have players and students and student athletes that are so committed and want to be good so badly, and the opportunity to help them to be to optimize their ability as a player, but also to use those lessons to become the best person that they can be. Those are, those really were the most important things that I take away from me. And getting back to your original question around what did I learn as a player that helped me as a coach, is number one to help people understand how to do it, not what to do, but how to do it. And I got that emphasized when I got my graduate degree from UNO in it was kinesiology was one of the courses you had to take. And the professor talked a lot about teaching people how to do things rather than telling them what to do, and showing them how to do it or having them experience how to do it. The other thing I took away is really the understanding that everybody learns a little bit differently, right? I was a coach. I grew up watching people diagram X's and O's on a chalkboard. A lot of my teammates didn't really understand that. They had to replicate it on the court, or they had to see it on video or things like that. And then the other thing that was really important, I thought, is to understand that everybody wants to win. Everybody wants to be successful. And my job as a coach is to help them to be successful, and not to tell them what to do or to tell them how they should do it or what they should do, but really help them to be successful, not only in helping to teach them what it takes to be successful, but putting them in positions to be successful and helping them to understand that. And then, of course, there's the whole psychology about, alignment with your mental, your physical, your emotional, and your spiritual aspects of your life. And having alignment certainly frees you up to be successful.
Yeah, no doubt. And that's definitely interesting. It sounds like there was, it all goes back to growing up as a coach's kid, and understanding both sides of it, I'm sure, was very beneficial. So I know you made a few stops on the coaching carousel, starting at Creighton, and then you moved on to Northern Iowa, and you made a stop at Colorado, and all over the place. What ultimately led to, you stepping out of that industry, getting into broadcasting, the business world? What was I guess it for you? What led you to make that decision?
Yeah, it's interesting. So I spent 9 years in 4 different places. Enjoyed coaching a great deal. Wasn't making a ton of money, by standards. In assistant coaches in those days, weren't making a ton of money. You were in it for the love of the game and things like that. Um, I'd had a great experience. 7 of the 9 years I coached with Tom Apke, which was a wonderful experience. The other stops I had, the head coaches weren't the people that I had alignment with, right? And of course, and going back to what we had talked about before, I had such great success as a player and very, very marginal success as a coach as far as wins and losses, right? The relationships were great. The relationships I still have with some of the players that I coached were great. But I wasn't kind of on that trajectory that was going in the right direction. I had my twins were 2.5 years old at the time. I had a young family, growing responsibilities and things like that. So when I left Northern Illinois, which was the last stop, I was there about a year and a half. When I left there, I had some opportunities to get into coaching, but I had the opportunity to move back to Omaha, which is where my wife was from, and certainly I felt comfortable. And we started, I worked for Dan Livingston at Sports Video Productions, and he had started a production company, which we had the rights to the Nebraska games and the coaches shows and things like that. We had the rights to Creighton's. We had some regional rights to some things. And so I had the opportunity to really, parlay my love for sports with, as you can see, I can talk a lot. So, the ability to talk some and relate some of the things that we had done in sports and coaching and things like that. So it was a great experience and enjoyed it. And from then, I actually had a longer broadcast career, but what happened was Coach Osborne, well, in those days, again, not only was basketball a far different game, but but the whole sports environment was totally different. In those days, you had the NCAA and the CFA that controlled all of the rights to live broadcasts. Even though ESPN was an entity at the time, it wasn't going around buying up rights, nor was USA Network, et cetera. So you had three networks that really consumed all of the rights, and really it was CBS and ABC. And so what happened was all of the games that were not televised live on ABC or CBS, the rights came back to the individual schools. And so we had the rights to 3 or 4 Nebraska live football games. We had 6 or 7 live basketball games. We had 6 or 7 live Creighton games. And so we were able to do a lot of things where we would buy the time, sell the advertising, do the talent work, line up the production crews. Really, it was a wonderful experience, and I learned a ton. And then Coach Osborne, who was, obviously we were very close to, we did their games, we did his coaches' shows, we did all their highlight videos and things like that. He called us one day and said, hey, they tell me I have this computer system that will edit and duplicate videotape. We don't know what the heck we're doing. Why don't you come down here and help us? We want to try it for spring football. And so we went and found somebody who knew what they were doing, and we took them with us, and we set them up for spring football. We sold them the system. They got a sweetheart deal. We sold them the system. It worked great. And 2 weeks after spring football, Jim Wacker called and said, Randy, we just made a decision in the Southwest Conference to move from film to video. We don't know what the heck we're doing. Coach Osborne said I should call you. And literally overnight, an industry was born. And I went to work for the company that had the software that would drive the editing and the duplication of the video. And we sold over 200 systems in about 12 months. We took that company public. And really, the industry and the growth of the sports analytics industry was off and running, and it's still growing even today.
That's fantastic. And I have a ton more questions for you. And so I think, why don't we end this here, and then we will, explore more about your professional career, Eccker Sports, NIL, your time as a pioneer in the film and video streaming industry, and a lot more on an episode that will drop 2 weeks from now. So thank you, Randy, for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and make sure to hop back on the podcast in 2 weeks when Randy's back on talking a little bit more about what we've been up to recently.